All right, so you've handed us a mountain of stuff on this Hurricane Milton, articles, social media, the works, and the anxiety is really palpable, especially for folks in Tampa Bay. What is it about this particular storm that's got you so concerned?
I think um I think it's a combination of things. Tampa Bay's got some, well, unique vulnerabilities, we'll say.
Yeah.
And then there's the historical context, kind of looming over everything.
Yeah, let's dig into those vulnerabilities for a sec. One of the articles mentioned Tampa Bay's geography being, and I quote, a recipe for disaster. Something about a shallow continental shelf.
Right, right. Picture a dinner plate, submerged just under the water. That's kind of what the continental shelf off Tampa Bay is like. This gradual slope extending out for miles acts like a ramp for a hurricane's surge, allowing it to build and push massive amounts of water towards the coast.
And not exactly ideal for a city that's, right there on the bay.
Not at all. Some projections are showing a potential surge from Milton exceeding 10 feet. To put that into perspective, if you're standing on the ground in Tampa, that wall of water could be well over your head.
Okay, so that's an image I did not need. And we haven't even gotten to the history yet. It's been a while since Tampa Bay's seen a direct hit from a hurricane, right? Like 1946 was the last one.
Yeah, almost 80 years. It's a double-edged sword. You've got generations who haven't experienced a major hurricane firsthand. But that lack of experience can breed, well, complacency.
Right, like we've been lucky makes you forget how to prepare for when you're not so lucky anymore. One of these articles had a really startling stat. Over 2 million people would be in evacuation zones if Milton hits Cat 5 strength. Can you imagine the roads if even half those people tried to leave?
It's not just the roads. You got to think about shelters, resources, emergency services. Evacuation on that scale is a huge logistical challenge. And then there's the historical context. There was a hurricane in 1921, a Category 3, slammed into Tampa Bay, caused $180 million in damage. Back then, obviously.
Yeah, everything was cheaper back then. Houses, food, you name it. That same storm today, the cost would be astronomical.
Exactly. But here's what's even more concerning. Sea level today is about a foot higher than it was back in 1921. So even if Milton followed the exact same path, same intensity, the flooding would be significantly worse.
Like history's giving us a warning, but Mother Nature hit the fast forward button. And then, on top of all this, there's this Hurricane Phoenix scenario from 2010. Sounds a little ominous.
Yeah, so emergency planners use this hypothetical Category 5 hurricane, direct hit on Tampa Bay, to model potential damage, guide disaster response. And it painted a pretty grim picture. Thousands of potential deaths, almost $250 billion in damage.
Okay, so I'm officially adding update my hurricane kit to my to-do list after this. But shifting gears a bit, this storm, Milton, it's not your typical Florida hurricane, is it? It's acting a little different.
You could say that, yeah. Milton's coming in from an unusual direction, and that throws off the typical hurricane models, the expectations. The National Hurricane Center, they're being very cautious with their predictions because of that.
So they're having a tough time pinning down what this storm's going to do.
It's not necessarily that they're stumped. It's more like acknowledging the uncertainty. Milton's unusual track, it makes it harder to predict its intensity, its potential impact. And one really important thing to remember is this isn't just a coastal problem. Even if you're miles inland, there's a risk of heavy rainfall and flooding from Milton.
So no matter where you are in Florida, this is a storm to watch very carefully. You've mentioned a storm surge a few times, and I think that's where a lot of people, myself included, we get tripped up. It's not just the wind and rain, it's the ocean literally rising up. Can you break down why storm surge is such a threat, especially in a place like Tampa Bay?
Yeah, you got it. A storm surge, it's often the most dangerous part of a hurricane, especially somewhere like Tampa Bay, so vulnerable. Think of it like this. A hurricane's wind, it's like this giant hand, right, sweeping across the ocean. That hand pushes this huge mass of water towards the coast, and that's your surge. But here's the thing, even small changes in the hurricane's track, like even the shape of the coastline, can make a big difference. We're talking a few inches of flooding versus a surge several feet high.
Okay, so help me understand this. What is it about Tampa Bay that makes it so susceptible to this hand pushing water around?
It all goes back to that shallow continental shelf we talked about. Because the ocean floor slopes so gradually, the surge has nowhere to go but up and inland. So, imagine Tampa Bay like a bowl, the open end facing west towards the Gulf. Now, if Milton tracks to the north of the bay, like some of these models are predicting, that's when you get that worst-case scenario. The hurricane's counterclockwise winds would push the water right into that bowl, piling it up, and potentially you get that 10-plus foot surge everyone's talking about.
So north bad. The surge basically gets funneled right into Tampa Bay. What if Milton shifts south, though? Any better?
South is still dangerous, definitely. But it's a different story. Instead of pushing water in, a south track could actually pull water out of Tampa Bay, which, yeah, sounds weird, I know, but it's all about how the hurricane's low pressure interacts with the air and the water around it.
Hold on, back up. How can a hurricane pull water out?
So the center of a hurricane, it's like a giant straw, right? Area of super low pressure, like a vacuum almost. As that low pressure moves near water, it can actually draw the water up.
Hmm.
So Milton tracking south of Tampa Bay, that suction would pull water away from the bay, push it towards other parts of the coast.
Okay, so maybe Tampa Bay gets a little lucky, but it's like playing hot potato with this wall of water. Someone else is going to get hit harder.
Exactly. That water has to go somewhere. That could mean a much higher surge for the communities south of Tampa, like Fort Myers, Naples, even the Keys. Nature wants to balance out, you know. It's just a matter of where.
It's like this hurricane's playing roulette with the whole coastline. Speaking of curveballs, got to talk about this wild card one of the articles mentioned. Something about high altitude winds messing with Milton's strength. What's that all about?
Ah, you're talking about wind shear. It's one of the most, well, unpredictable things about hurricanes. You see, those winds way up high, like in the jet stream, they can really change a hurricane's structure, its intensity.
So, like, the same jet stream winds we always hear about messing with weather patterns all over the place.
One and the same. Usually, strong wind shear, it's bad news for a hurricane, disrupts its rotation, can even rip it apart. But sometimes, if those high-altitude winds line up just right, it's like the opposite happens. They can actually make the hurricane stronger.
Wait, so the thing that's supposed to weaken it can actually make it stronger? How does that even work?
Okay, think of it like venting a chimney. If those high-altitude winds create an exhaust above the hurricane, it can make the storm more intense, pulling away the hot air rising from the center. So more warm, moist air from the ocean rushes in. Basically, it's like feeding the hurricane, making it stronger.
So it's like a coin toss, these winds. Either they snuff out the hurricane or they're like pouring fuel on the fire. Yikes. Makes this whole situation even trickier, huh?
It really does. And like that wasn't enough to worry about. There's this one model, the HAFSB.
Huh.
It's been making some predictions about Milton.
Yeah, one of the articles called it out, said it's got people more spooked than the others. What's the deal with this HAFSB model? Why is it so special?
Well, it's a newer model, relatively speaking. But the thing about HAFSB is it's got a good track record, you know? Like last year, it nailed a bunch of those major hurricanes, even Ian. Remember that one?
Yeah, Ian was brutal, especially for Florida.
Exactly. So when a model like HAFSB raises a red flag, people tend to take notice and, well, we maybe get a little nervous.
Like that friend who's always right about bad news, even when you don't want him to be. So what's it saying about Milton?
This HAFSB model, it's showing a potential for rapid intensification. That means Milton could get a whole lot stronger in a hurry, maybe become a major hurricane way faster than anyone expects right before it hits land. And guess where it shows this intensification happening?
Don't tell me. Right before it slams into Tampa Bay.
You got it. Definitely not the news anyone wants to hear,
Yeah.
but got to be prepared.
Yeah. Really highlights how fast things can change with these hurricanes. And speaking of being prepared, one thing that really hit me while going through all this info was just how many people might be in harm's way. One article mentioned a Cat 5 evacuation plan. What happens if, those 2 million people actually have to leave?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's one thing to have an evacuation plan on paper, but actually moving that many people out of danger safely, that's a whole other ballgame. You're talking massive traffic jams, shortages on gas, and then there's always going to be those folks who just can't leave or won't.
Right. It's easy to look at a map and say evacuate, but it's different when you think about, real people's lives. Some folks, they've been rooted in those areas for generations. Others might not have the means to just pick up and leave. And some folks, they just misjudge the danger. It makes you wonder, how do you even begin to prepare a whole city for a storm that could literally wipe out entire neighborhoods?
That's one of the biggest challenges coastal communities are facing these days. It goes way beyond boarding up windows and stocking up on bottled water. You need strong infrastructure, good communication systems, a culture of preparedness. People need to know what to do, how to get info, and those who stay behind, they need support, not just to get through the storm itself, but to rebuild their lives after.
It's kind of like we get so caught up in the immediate danger of a hurricane, the wind, the rain, the surge, that we forget about the long game, the lasting impact it can have. This storm, Milton, It has the potential to reshape Tampa Bay for years, both physically and for the people who live there.
Sobering thought, isn't it? And these sources you shared, they really drive that point home.
Yeah.
Yeah, they focus on the worst-case scenarios, but sometimes that's what it takes to wake people up, to understand how serious this is. It's not enough to just know the science behind a hurricane. We have to really grasp how vulnerable we are to these forces of nature. Take responsibility for our own safety.
Respect the power of nature. Learn from the past. And, yeah, prepare for a future that feels less certain every day.
Well said. We might not be able to control the weather, but we can control how ready we are for it, how we talk about it, and how we take care of each other when it's all over.
Couldn't agree more. To our listener, we hope this deep dive into Hurricane Milton has given you a clearer picture of the threat to Tampa Bay, the hows and whys behind these powerful storms, and maybe even giving you something to think about as we all watch and wait. Stay safe out there.